Week 7 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few wide receivers I looked at off the wire this week. The first receiver, Keyshawn Bote of the New England Patriots. Bote, early in the season, he had a couple big games to start. And then weeks 3 to 5, he didn't do much. In week 6, a breakout game, even though it was a great matchup with the Saints. 5 catches, 93 yards, and 2 touchdowns. The last few weeks, week 4 versus Carolina, catch 18 yards. Week 5 with the Bills, 3 catches, 43 yards, 3 targets. And then, like I said, in New Orleans, he had the big ball game fund in the end zone twice. So Stephon Diggs, he had an off game in week 6 where he was double teamed a lot. And it was more Bode and Demario Douglas in that game for the New England Patriots. And right now, he's out there in 92% of fantasy leagues. I know there's going to be ups and downs, obviously, with younger wide receivers throughout the league. But with Drake May in there, quarterback, he looks like a grizzled vet. Already is Drake May only in his second season. With a lot of attention going to Stephon Diggs and Hunter Henry, Bode's going to get a lot of one-on-one coverage. And this week with a good matchup at Tennessee, I think he's worth an ad in 12-team leagues or deeper. Next receiver, Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts. So this is the last chance for fantasy owners to go out there and get Josh Downs. He just makes the list, available in 51% of fantasy leagues. In the last 2 weeks, he's come on now, is Downs. After the first month of the season, he didn't get anything going with Daniel Jones. Week 5 versus the Raiders, 6 catches, 54 yards, 8 targets. In week 6 versus the Cardinals, a nice game, 6 catches, 42 yards, a touchdown on 7 targets. Week 7, on paper, not a great matchup versus the Chargers. I give up the third least amount of fantasy points to wide receivers on the season, but this Colt team, well-oiled machine, one of the best offenses in the league, 5-1 on the season as well, is Indianapolis. And Josh Downs and Daniel Jones are starting to get rapport, but like I said, he's out there in 51% of fantasy leagues, so it's the last call for owners to go out there and get Downs this week. Next receiver, Trey Tucker of the Las Vegas Raiders. He's another wide receiver, barely out there in fantasy leagues, only out there in 55% of fantasy leagues. And in my opinion, he's the number one target in this passing game for the Raiders. Obviously, with Brock Bowers out and most likely out in week 7 as well. So the last 2 weeks, double-digit fantasy games for Trey Tucker. We know week 3, he had the breakout game in Washington, 8 catches, 145 yards, 3 touchdowns on 9 targets. Then week 4, didn't do anything versus the Bears. Week 5, at the Colts, he carried 9 yards, 4 catches, 62 yards, 6 targets. In week 6 versus Tennessee, 5 catches, 70 yards, 5 targets. Week 7, a pretty good matchup in terms of trailing, and they're going to have to throw the football a whole lot, is this Raider team at the Kansas City Chiefs, where their offense is one of the best offenses in the league once again. After a couple years, their offense wasn't great, and now they get Rashee Rice back in the offense as well for Kansas City. That's even more points on the board, I believe. So they're going to be trailing early and often this week, I think, is this Raider team. And for the majority of the season, where Tucker is going to get opportunities. So right now, while he's out there, like I said, in 55% of fantasy leagues, definitely a wide out to head this week. Next receiver, Hollywood Brown of the Kansas City Chiefs. So like I said, Rashee Rice is going to return to this lineup. They got Xavier Worthy, Juju Smith-Schuster, Hollywood Brown, but I still believe Hollywood Brown's going to have a role in this offense, and he's a wide receiver that could go out there, stretch the field a little bit, and a pretty solid route runner is Hollywood Brown. In the last few games for him, 2 out of 3 games, double-digit fantasy days for Hollywood Brown. Week 4 versus Baltimore, 3 catches, 38 yards, a touchdown. Week 5 at the Jaguars, 4 catches, 48 yards on 8 targets. Week 6 versus Detroit, a big game. It was for him, 4 catches, 45 yards, 2 touchdowns. So Hollywood Brown, the most experienced wide receiver, him and Juju Smith-Schuster in this offense for Kansas City. And I don't think he's going to get relegated right to the bench. Like I said, a lot of 3 wide receiver sets he's going to play in. And even on the outside, I think they're going to line him up with Xavier Worthy now more in the slot, and Rice and Brown, your outside wide receivers. So week 7, a great matchup versus the Raiders. Give up the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the year. And coming off a nice game for Hollywood and out there in 57% of fantasy leagues. Definitely an ad this week. The next receiver, Kendrick Bourne of the San Francisco 49ers. So 2 weeks in a row, he's gone out there and put up monster ball games. Week 5 at the Rams, 10 catches, 142 yards, 11 targets. In week 6 at Tampa Bay, only 5 catches, but 142 yards once again on 9 targets. So week 7, mediocre matchup versus Atlanta. We saw Atlanta shut down, for the most part, that Buffalo Bill offense on Monday Night Football in week 6. But Kendrick Bourne, he has a good rapport with Mac Jones, even though reinforcements might be coming back to the lineup in George Kittle. He's going to practice this week. try to play. And Brock Purdy, I think, is going to try to get back into the lineup as well for this 49er team. But Jawan Jennings, he's banged up with multiple injuries, 5 fractured ribs, high ankle sprain, shoulder injuries. I doubt he's going to do much, have much impact. And also Ricky Pierce was not 100% to return. So Kendrick Bourne, either way, I think worst case will be a number 3 wide receiver for this 49er team. And after 2 weeks in a row with good production, he's definitely someone who should stay on the field, and also someone who should be added in fantasy leagues. Out there in 65%, next receiver, Jalen Coker of the Carolina Panthers. So Coker, he ramped up activity last week. He was a full participant in practice. They held him out in the Week 6 game versus the Cowboys, and it's a good possibility, I think, he returns here in Week 7 at the New York Jets as Jalen Coker. So this offense is getting it going. Rico Dotto, 2 games in a row, 200 yards from scrimmage plus. And Ted McMillan, 2 first touchdowns of his career versus the Cowboys in last week's game. So if they could add Jalen Coker to this lineup to go with McMillan and move him to that number 3 wide receiver, I think that's a solid receiving core for the young quarterback, Bryce Young. And this offense, like I said, they could get things going. So right now, while he's out there in 88% of fantasy leagues, and there's a good chance he plays this week at the New York Jets, I would just add him on my roster and see what he does, obviously, on your bench in the first game. Next receiver, Sterling Shepard of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Chris Godwin, he's already ruled out going into this week's ball game at the Detroit Lions. And Emeka Egbuka, we'll see how long he's going to be out, but he's out as well for sure going into this one versus the Lions. So Sterling Shepard could be the number 1 arguably, but they're optimistic as well. Mike Evans is going to return to practice and possibly play this week at Detroit. But either way, Shepard's going to get an expanded role once again. He had that, obviously, in the Week 6 game versus the 49ers, but he only had 2 catches, 51 yards on 3 targets. But Sterling Shepard, he's been a decent slot guy last season and this year for this Tampa Bay Buc team. And like I said, in a game where they know they got to put points on the board, especially if all 3 of those receivers are out, Shepard's going to get looks, and he's out there in 95% of fantasy leagues. And the final receiver is his teammate Cameron Johnson of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So obviously, when Egbuka went out, someone had to step up, and it was Cameron Johnson and Tez Johnson both finding in the end zone. But Cameron Johnson had the bigger game, obviously, for Tampa Bay. 4 catches, 64 yards, and a touchdown on 4 targets. So Week 7, like I said, this is a matchup with the Lions. Lions do give up the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. And Baker Mayfield, he's the ultimate gunslinger. It doesn't matter who's out there on the field. If you could go out there, catch the football, and run a little bit and make some plays, he's going to get you the football. And that's exactly the case with Sterling Shepard and Cameron Johnson. Like I said, we saw last week, Egbuka went down. It was down to their 4th, 5th wide receivers, and they still went out there and made plays and beat the 49ers. So Johnson out there in 99% of fantasy leagues. And if Mike Evans doesn't play as well, to go with Godwin and Egbuka, he's definitely going to see playing time in this ball game. So that's a few wide receivers I looked at off the wire for Week 7 of the fantasy football season.